So when Ben and I started this program, this initiative at ICAT just a couple years ago, this is only coming up on the end of the second year of doing this, we decided that one of the key focuses here was trying to find venue and research opportunities for our faculty here at Virginia Tech to take their creative work, particularly abroad. And so we've had a number of really exciting exchanges that manifested finally this year. And one of them was an exchange with the Center for Creative Technologies at the University of Galway in Ireland, which also had some other partners involved in that, as well as the Burren College of Fine Arts, and Solus Nua, which is an organization in DC that specializes in facilitating international exchanges with Irish artists. So last fall, as part of the New Music and Technology Festival, we hosted 2 Irish artists from Galway who presented their work, and they were in residence here at Virginia Tech for about a week. They also spent a week in DC with Solus Nua, presenting some of their work there and creating new work. They spent some time in residence here creating new work, and afterwards they went to New York City for a week. So they had about a 3-week endeavor here in the United States, and really their time here at Virginia Tech was really productive. They met with students and taught some guest lectures and classes and so forth. And so in exchange, in November, we were really happy to send Chelsea to Ireland, and she'll tell you all about her project here, but I just want to invite you all to visit the ARTx link on the ICAT website and see some of the work that's been going on here, and invite all of you who are faculty members that may have some work that would be interesting or relevant to this program to come and talk with either Ben or I. If there's any kind of exchange that would make sense, or any kind of international partners where this would be relevant, we'd invite you all to be a part of it in the future. So I'll turn it over to Chelsea to talk about her work.
Morning, everyone. Thanks for coming. For those on the stream, I just wanted to make a note that you're going to see moving images, but there's no sound. So if you're on the stream and you're thinking, am I not hearing the video? There is no sound on the videos on the screen. So as long as you're hearing my voice, you're hearing everything. Thanks for that great introduction. So today I'm going to be talking about the project that I made when I was in Galway, and I'll talk a little bit about the trip itself too. The project is a work in progress called A Walk in the Dark. So as mentioned, this was first initiated through ARTx in Galway. I had the opportunity to go there for 2 weeks in November. During that time, I went to their Center for Creative Technologies. This is it. It is currently one room. It's very new. I really actually love spending time in really new centers and spaces because there's like a lot of energy, a lot of thinking about what's possible. And I wanted to also talk a little bit about like why it's valuable, even though we could find a room like this on our campus, why it's valuable to be able to go to another place. So I'll talk about that in a second. The second location was the Burren College of Art, and that is about an hour south on the other side of the bay in the western part of Ireland. And there, I also had a studio, a much more kind of classic paint-stained studio. But in both of those spaces, what I had was the opportunity to both meet other artists, talk deeply about my work, about their work. This is both students, faculty, people outside the university. And then really importantly, I had uninterrupted time to make my artwork. And as an artist and a researcher, one of the hardest things is really to carve out studio time to really be able to think and make. And it's really special to be able to carve out that time while also in a place where you're getting a lot of new ideas, new energy, new conversations. And so what we're seeing on the screen here is the first outputs of the project A Walk in the Dark. This is a web-based project, so what you're seeing is 3D spaces rendered in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, and this follows along a trajectory of some of my work. So what I'm going to do next is I'm going to talk just a little bit about what my work is, the context of my work, And then we're going to talk about this project, just so we can kind of start to build maybe an understanding of why being able to go to a residency with some ideas in the back of your head, how that allows someone to create something like this. For those of you that maybe code or do some of the more technical things, I went with just a few sketches, and I ended with over 1,000 lines of code in this artwork that I started to create, because having that really centered time to be able to do that allows you to really produce very, very quickly. And so it's a really special time. So I'm a research-based transdisciplinary artist working across digital and traditional media, focused on the trans body as a site of political violence and potential. In my practice, I examine and create systems as a mode of creative production and exploration. I'm interested in both material specificity and also in using materials that help me touch an idea. So I'm just going to briefly talk about 2 works from the past, and then I'm going to talk about the project that most quickly relates to the Walk in the Dark project. So this is a piece from 2019 called Productive Bodies. It's a procedurally generated video piece, meaning that I collected 80 or so different archival pieces of media, and then I wrote code to have those things blend and weave together to make this sort of living Xerox copy. And this was one of my first attempts at thinking about code and systems making as a way of producing a site of relationships for a viewer to explore, and that's really where my work exists today. Is I'm not interested in giving an A to B narrative as much as I'm interested in giving the viewer a set of relationships to ruminate on. But I'm also interested in using technology in unexpected ways. So what we see here is augmented reality version of a tattoo that's on my arm in a way that allows me to create a gallery on my arm. And so I'm always interested in the body and interventions that technology can make that challenge the limits and spaces of our body. And so this piece was really about both providing an opportunity for trans artists to show trans work on a trans body, and also to think about how we might use technology to sort of challenge our ideas of like what the internet is, what our bodies are, and where the limits are for those things. So the main body of work that I created before the A Walk in the Dark piece is about fog. And this work critically interrogates what society holds up as monstrous and looks to one of these figures, fog, as an aspirational rather than antagonistic figure. The work questions how subjects are perceived as monstrous and what that process says about the societies that produce them. Further, the work looks at fog's ability to resist capture, visualization, and control as a way to develop liberatory ideas about trans futurity and embodiment. So this is a screen capture from another 3-dimensional web-based work, The Fog, which was a commission for the San Jose Museum of Art, completed in 2023. In this work, I took this idea of fog as an aspirational figure and broke it up into 3 acts. So the first act, The Fog of War, looks at how fog has been understood through militaristic and economic lenses. Act 2, The Horror of Fog, looks at how we have considered and encountered fog through horror narratives. And Act 3 of The Fog imagines what it might be like for us to take these lessons of fog and actually use those for a positive resistance-based understanding of our embodiment. I also wanted to include here that along with the code work that I'm showing, I am also an object maker. And so all of this work, including the work that I'm showing today, will eventually have physical outputs as well. One of the nice things about going to a residency that's international and working digitally is that it's really easy to bring a lot of my studio with me, but knowing that a lot of this work will then also have these more physical outputs. So in this case, I made a poem for the Viewmaster. So I made a disc that has a 7-section poem that was composed specifically with this device in mind. So this gets us to A Walk in the Dark. This is a browser-based experience exploring the liberatory power of being enshrouded by darkness or fog. I'm interested in creating interactive experiences that allow viewers to reclaim or reimagine darkness and fog as empowering spaces for trans and queer thriving. Inspired by horror, the concept of the fog of war, and the poetic potential of the web, this work aims to create affective explorations for viewers. Extending from my recent work on fog and recent explorations on darkness, this work will use text, imagery, and interaction design to foster a kinship with obfuscation and to imagine a turn from the fear of the unknown to the power of the unknown. So that takes us back to what we're seeing here. So what this work consists of are these three-dimensional spaces that are procedurally generated. So what you're seeing here is what could be considered 3D models, right? But it's all created through code. And by creating it in code, I can very easily manipulate it, and I can constrain these very basic 3D models or 3D forms using some randomness to create variance and change while also having a still predictable outcome, right? So my interest with procedural generation in these works is that I want to allow random chance and happenstance into the work while also still having a sense of the constraints or the possibilities of the space that I'm creating, and code really allows me to do this. So key to this work is also this filter. So this will repeat here in a second. So what we're seeing here is a halftone filter. So this filter takes a three-dimensional space and it translates it in circles, much like old newspaper halftone. And then here we can see it without the filter, right? So this is before the filter, and then the filter comes on, and when the filter comes on, it immediately gives this different visual sense. And all of this, again, is taking place live in the web browser using code. And what I'm really interested in here is giving viewers an encounter or an interaction in the web that they're not expecting, and also creating spaces where the interaction design and the way that they're actually moving through the space support the ideas that I'm thinking about here. So in this case, I'm thinking about on-rails camera movement. I'm thinking about catacomb spaces, courtyards, gardens, sewers, and using all of these visual references and then interaction designs to create these spaces where you linger sort of outside of an architectural space. And so again, this was created during that 2-week period. One of the really exciting things is because of this experience, I was able to acquire another residency, so I'll have time this summer at a residency called Public Access Memories to continue developing this work. So I think I'm about at time, so if you have questions, I'm happy to take them. Thank you.
Hello. Thank you so much, Chelsea. Questions?
Thank you. I was just wondering if you've given any thought to accessibility of this artwork through the web browser.
Yeah. Thank you for mentioning that, actually. So I'm going to go back to this piece. So this was was my first large work on the web, and I was actually really excited to try to figure out what this would look like in an accessible way because this is for a museum, right? It's a large public institution. They have their own commitments that they want to keep. And so I really looked into the idea of ARIA tags and like how a screen reader would work with this. So this piece uses ASCII characters actually to register and render. But because I knew that some of this space would be just impossible to navigate, right, with there is an accessible description of the scene where I go through and I talk about it, and then there's a recorded video. And so for the Walk in the Dark piece, I'll be producing something similar, because that's actually, for me, one of the most exciting things about the web is that it is accessible. And so I think that making sure to actually use those accessibility tools and kind of keep that promise of the web is really core to my interest. So thanks for the question.
Other questions? Yes, Hermie.
Thank you. Hi, Chelsea. I'd like to know what inspiration you got from the residency in Ireland.
Yeah. So the two artists that came here, Ruth Clinton and Neve Moriarty. They were having a show there, and so we got to talk again. So we got to talk while they were here. We had more conversations there. There's a lot of overlap, even though our work is very different. There's a lot of overlap, so there's really inspiring conversations there. And then also the folks at both universities. I was able to, have dinners with faculty and artists and just have those, kind of heart-to-heart art conversations that you get to have sometimes. And so those were really cup-filling, right? Like those things really kind of, even though they weren't necessarily directly related to this piece, just sort of setting a mood of creative exploration and openness. The other thing that was really striking to me about a lot of the folks that I met in Ireland was this sense of solidarity that they had with both with marginalized groups, right? So as a space, as a country, they have been fighting against colonization from Britain for a really long time. They are really outspoken in their support of Ukraine and of Palestine and of a lot of other folks. And that really kind of flowed through a lot of conversations. And they were really invested in understanding the context that I was bringing to them of being a trans person in the United States in a time when things were really challenging. And so that also was like a really, it was a really profound experience, honestly, to be surrounded by so many people who so thoroughly seem to have practiced empathy for others, people that they don't know and people who they may never see. And that was really powerful, yeah.
Thanks, Chelsea. Following up on Hiromi's question, Ireland is famously, I've never been, but I understand it's famously very foggy there. Is there any like IRL fog that really has spoken to you in your explorations?
Yes, yeah. So there was one morning there that was extremely foggy, and I just felt, it was like my last day there, and it was so foggy, and it was the most foggy, and I was like, they did it. For me, I got it. But the fog explorations, this work came about when I was living in San Francisco, and people think about like, oh, the fog in San Francisco. But actually, I grew up in the Mississippi River Valley. In my hometown, we would get school canceled for fog because of how thick it was. And as a young, not out yet or understanding what trans person or transness was, going to a Catholic school, getting school canceled by fog was about the best thing that could happen to me in my life. So I actually grew up loving fog, not just like the visual elements of it, but it had this power to me. It was like, wow, this thing, like we got school canceled for fog more than we did snow. Like it might get 6 inches of snow and they would plow it out of the way, but they couldn't plow the fog out of the way. And there's something about that, this like thing that like there's nothing that they could do, right? Like if it decided to descend, there wasn't anything that they could do to stop it. And that, I think, for me, has always been just like this enchanting thing. It's like this combination of a visual and then also this kind of inexorable experience that was like really, really magical, yeah.
Thank you. Hi, this was amazing. I'm curious about your process as a research-based artist. So how does it work when you start a project, for example, a walk in the dark, and then the research, and then back to creating? How does that process? Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's not one size fits all, for sure. I mean, sometimes a visual form or an idea is the real start. But I often start with a question. So questions are usually how the work drives forward. For the fog work, it was how can fog be an aspirational figure for trans embodiment? That was like this question. And from there, I then started to look at where fog appears in the world. So I would watch movies, I was reading books, I started to do research about fog, the idea of the fog of war as like a term, I figured out where that came from. So for me, it starts with a question. I then usually dive into whatever visual cultural material that I'm sort of responding or pushing against. And then I'm also working in the studio. It's not a linear process is the main thing. It's like these things are constantly a back and forth. So for example, in the productive bodies piece, this piece here, I did multiple stages of archival visits. Some of those were on-site physical archives, some of them were digital archives. Then I would go back to the studio, I would make some things, I would look at some things, and then I would go back to the archive again. And so it's really a back and forth. But for me, again, it's really that finding some core questions and then taking those questions sort of on a walk across materials is really how I think about a lot of my work.
Thank you, Chelsea. You're opening up an investigation into miasma. I'd like to ask if you could say a little bit more about your intentionality around what you referred to as effective exploration.
Yeah. So I think there is a, how do I put this? I started transitioning like over 15 years ago, and there's always been this kind of urge or this push for people to like have me appear, right? Like that as a trans person, the best way to make work is to be visible and to make myself visible and understood, and that is somehow like the way to make successful trans art or political art. And I don't find that to be like a very interesting project. I'm much more interested in creating a set of relationships that allows people to have more of a feeling or an emotional encounter with the ideas that I'm thinking about. Like I'm more interested in what I can produce in someone's body, how I can make someone feel. I'm interested in thinking about the state of somebody's body, where they are. One of the things I love about a website is that most of the time, people are going to encounter this in their home. I think you're much more likely to have an emotional experience inside your home, in the private of your home, than you are in a white cube gallery, for example. And so for me, when I say affective exploration, what I'm trying to think about is, what are the ways that I can set a viewer up for allowing a sort of vulnerability towards the subject matter, or how can I allow them the best possible chance to respond, not in like an analytical way, but in a more emotive way to the perhaps challenging thing that I am presenting. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but yeah.
Chelsea, thanks very much for sharing. You started your piece with the notion of a walk, and you sort of hinted at that a little bit, but I was wondering if you could elaborate some on why you chose that word or that metaphor or that concept.
Yeah. I think, in previous pieces, so in this piece, for these pieces, for example, the part of the interaction design piece, or like the movement, what the viewer can do in them piece, is really, I use that to sort of shape the tone of the space itself. So in this one, it's talking about like military and economy, and so it has a sort of orbit controls that you might find in like a 3D modeling software, this sort of godlike orbiting point of view, because that is the sort of positionality that a lot of the folks working in that space would want to have. Whereas in the next space, it uses your sort of classic arrow keys and mouse from like a first-person video game sort of view, which is much more common in horror, right? Like in horror, we're looking at a person, either in the first person or the third person, but we are really sort of centering personal experience. And so moving into this piece, I wanted to think about how I wanted to, how do I put this? How I wanted to compose the movement in such a way that people would have a linked set of experiences, but that those experiences would change every time that the page would be refreshed, and that they could move back and forth. And so for me, that kind of felt like going on a walk out and back. And of course, I do, now that you say that, I'm also realizing I say that or think about that in a lot of the rest of my work, so it probably deserves further investigation. Yeah.
Thanks.
Oh, okay. Just returning to the comments that you made a moment ago about this tremendous pressure upon especially trans artists to represent the body. And then thinking about your embrace of fog, I'm just so reminded of when Edward Glissant writes about opacity and the kind of, we must embrace the right to opacity. I've noticed that you are seeming to, I don't see the word opacity coming up, instead I see this word obfuscation. And I have to imagine that that's an intentional choice, choosing that word. And I'd love to hear more about how obfuscation is a useful word for you, or a word that seems to be appealing or appropriate to this project.
Yeah, I love that you bring that up because actually in February I was in a show and I was invited to something called the Trans Opacity Classroom, and we went and it was all trans folks and we talked about this. I think I love that as a phrase as well. I think for me, obfuscation is perhaps simply because it is a verb. And it allows more agency for a trans person. So it's less like one or the other, and it's more to say like if I'm talking about an act or like actively resisting, then perhaps obfuscation allows more of that agency, where opacity is perhaps is better suited in terms of like description, if that makes sense. But I actually picked up that book at the exhibition because they had copies, and I was like, I haven't gotten all the way through it yet, but it was one of those resonating moments. So I love that you picked that up. So.
Oh, there's a question from online. You mentioned that sound was not included in the presentation. Would you please describe the sound component of your work?
Yeah, so in the Walk in the Dark piece, there is no sound yet, emphasis on the yet. For the fog pieces, there is sound, so we can try it here. I don't know if it will actually play because we didn't test it, but. So this work uses, again, the accessibility features to use a screen reading capability to read text out loud. And so it uses whatever voice your computer has for the screen reader in the browser to create the sound. So for this scene, that is what I'm working with. And for the fog work in general, all of the sound is generated using code. So it is procedural, like the imagery is procedural. For A Walk in the Dark, that work, I imagine the sound to be a mixture of composed and procedural, sort of ambient, darker tones that sort of set a mood in a way that these pieces are a little bit more. I would say that the sound in the fog work is more conceptually driven, and the sound in the A Walk in the Dark work is going to be more emotionally driven, but it doesn't exist yet, so.
Well, thank you so much, Chelsea. We're at time. I'm sure Chelsea can answer any other questions you have afterwards. Just want to say thank you again.
Yeah, thank you.